Hello, my name is Ugbaad, and I'm a fourth-year environmental science student with a minor in biology. I did my honors thesis on Banff National Park under the supervision of Dr. Nigel Waltho, who is a conservation biologist and data analyst from the Department of Biology here at Carleton University. My thesis looked at the possible influence the wildlife crossings in Banff National Park may have on the patterns of train-wildlife collisions along the Canadian Pacific Railway. Before I go any further, I'll explain a few key terms. The first is wildlife crossings. A wildlife crossing is a structure that helps wildlife cross a human-made barrier safely. In Banff, the human-made barrier is the Trans-Canada Highway. These are just a few types of wildlife crossings found in Banff: underpasses, overpasses, and culverts. Banff National Park is located in Alberta, Canada. It's Canada's oldest national park and home to over 50 different species of mammals. Train wildlife or vehicle wildlife collisions are just that: an accident between an animal and the Canadian Pacific Railway freight trains, or an accident between an animal and the motorist on the Trans-Canada Highway. In the 1950s, the Trans-Canada Highway was constructed, which bisected the park and created a barrier for wildlife movement. Since the mid-1970s, Parks Canada expressed concern for the number of wildlife vehicle collisions that involved mammals from the park. In order to reduce the number of accidents, large ungulate-proof fences were built along either side of the highway. Although the fencing prevented mammals from wandering onto the road, it worsened the barrier effect by completely preventing movement. Therefore, wildlife crossings were implemented along the highway to help increase connectivity and promote safe wildlife movement within the park. There have been a lot of studies that show that these wildlife crossings have successfully reduced collision rates and improved animal movement throughout the park. However, the Canadian Pacific Railway is another transportation corridor that runs parallel to the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff. Unfortunately, there's been a lack of corresponding research effort to understand the dynamics of train-wildlife collisions. Understanding the causes and influences of these collisions could be very beneficial financially and ecologically. Millions of dollars have been invested into the success of these wildlife crossings, but the efforts of Parks Canada could be futile if successful use of crossing structures results in subsequent death on the railway. For my thesis, I used data sets provided by Parks Canada to run a multi-spatial and temporal analysis on train wildlife collisions. After running multiple statistical analyses, I found a correlation between crossing structure usage and train wildlife collisions. To put it simply, the animals that used the crossing structure were very similar to the animals found killed on the railway. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that the wildlife crossings do influence train wildlife collisions. I also recommend that future parks management should be a joint effort between Parks Canada and the Canadian Pacific Railway. Thank you for listening.